I'm now going to take this forward to the next step and introduce you to what I call material carbon and process carbon, so we are both on the same page. Today, you take naphtha, you take natural gas, you go through a refinery, you make aromatics, you make ethylene, you make propylene. You make polyethylene, you make polypropylene, these polyolefin plastics. I don't know about the Indian numbers, but in the US and elsewhere, 60% is polyethylene, polypropylene based plastics, resins used in a number of different applications. That's what you have there. Today, we can use what I call biorenewable feedstock. And when I talk about the word biomass or bioresidue, I'm talking about crops. Corn, soybean, sugar, and before you start getting all up, oh, what about food, fuel? We'll talk about that later. But when you say bio-based, doesn't have to be crops. It could be residues. It could be tree plantations. It could be algae, which is used to clean up water. It could be plant oil. It could be any one of these carbon-based biological feedstock. You can convert them to what I call biomonomers. Sugars, plant oils, ferment to ethanol, go to ethylene, metathesis to propylene, and you can make polyethylene and polypropylene. Okay? You can also go from the aromatics, that is terephthalic acid, ethylene glycol, and make PET. One of the big packaging right in front of you, every bottle made out of that resin. You have a choice. You can use petrol or you can use bio, right? Today, 99% is petrol-based, but should you diversify? Should you look at other feedstocks? And that's what it is. And at this stage, I must tell you, you are in the plastics business. You're not in the oil business. Maybe some of you are, I don't know. So it does not matter whether the base resin coming from oil or is it coming from something which is more sustainable, more valuable. And I want you to keep that in mind as we go forward with it. You can make entirely new polymers, PLA, polylactic acid, PHAs, polyhydroxyalkanoates. These are microbially produced polyesters. But what I want to tell you is two things. I want to separate the carbon you see in each of these structural formulas for polyethylene, polypropylene, PET, PLA. That carbon can originate from a biological feedstock or from a petrofossil feedstock. And the question I'm posing is, what is the impact of that carbon on the environment? And then you have what I call the process carbon footprint, which is the process of converting that feedstock, whether it is natural gas or the biological feedstock, to polyethylene, polypropylene, PET. That process has an impact. That is the process carbon footprint. I want you to separate the two because, as I'm going to point out later, they have very important significance in the reason to switch. Okay? You follow that. Material carbon footprint, process carbon footprint, and these are the polymers we make out of that. Okay. So what is the value proposition? Why do I say, or why are you even listening to me about bio-based, right? This is the reason. If you switch the feedstock from petrofossil carbon, I'm talking of the carbon, to bio-based carbon, it allows you a zero material carbon footprint. Zero material carbon footprint. I'm not talking about the process carbon footprint, which is the process of converting it, but I'm just talking about the material carbon footprint. This is the hypothesis, and I will show you why, how, and how you can calculate it, and what's out in the world today as we speak. Okay? Now, when we talk carbon footprint, it equates to what I call heat trapping CO2 emissions, which is directly related to global warming, climate change problems. We won't debate that. Let's assume that that is what it is. We can have a separate discussion on that. But the carbon footprint reductions that is globally being pushed. Okay. Now, two other value attributes for the value proposition comes from energy and environmental security. This is very big player in the US where you want to diversify from a petro-fossil base. I assume India, I think it imports 60% of its oil. What if 15% of it came from your backyard? It helps the farmer, it gives him a value product. Why don't we do that? That doesn't mean you switch all or nothing, but you can do that. That's where we talk about energy and environmental security, but it also equates to economic development. And this is the big driver in the US, empowering rural farm forestry and allied manufacturing industry. It allows the farmers more opportunities to create value-added industrial products as opposed to simply selling food-based products. Now, of course, you can ask, well, I want him to serve food for everybody, but with the biotechnology and all, that may not be an issue, and this is the driver for it. So that's the value proposition: zero material carbon footprint, sustainable material carbon footprint. So I will explain the value proposition with this slide. I take you back to high school. You studied this in high school, right? I'm a professor, I teach, so whether you like it or not, I'm going to teach you. And you have to pay attention because that's what you have been told to do, right? So no quizzes, but I see there's paper there, so you might want to take notes. Anyway, so carbon is present in the atmosphere as inorganic carbon, correct? CO2. Photosynthesis, using sunlight energy, converts that inorganic carbon to organic carbon, CH2OX. That's for those chemists in the audience here. This is the biomass ag forestry crops. I call this new carbon. The key point is that this sequestration or transformation takes place within 1 year to 10 years, 15, 20, whatever you want, a very short time period. 1 year if you plant a crop because you plant it every year, 10 years if you have a tree plantation, maybe 15 years if you have other biomass plantations. I call that new carbon. That new carbon over millions of years is fossilized to give you fossil resources, oil, coal, natural gas. In fact, is in the Webster's dictionary of fossil is old, right? So both are part of the same carbon cycle. And you heard this argument that bio is natural, is organic. Well, fossil feedstocks are also natural. They're part of the same earth. They didn't come from Mars or Jupiter. They're also natural. They're also organic, and they're also renewable over millions of years. Okay, but it's still renewable. And we use it and put it back into the environment in 1 year to 10 years. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a very fundamental value proposition for the bio. The rate and time scales of carbon sequestration to fossil has taken place over millions of years. The rate and time scale of use and putting it back 1 to 10 years. It's simple math, not sustainable, right? But if I am allowed a choice of using biomass feedstock, the rate and time scales of carbon fixation is in balance with the rate and time scales of use and putting it back. I am carbon neutral, or what I call zero carbon footprint, by just the selection of feedstock. That's what I was talking about of the material carbon footprint. So, short, in balance, sustainable carbon cycle using bio-based feedstock is the intrinsic fundamental value proposition for switching the carbon in your product from petro-fossil to bio-renewable. You're not going to switch 100% of it, but you're going to make the transition because you're going to make it more balanced, right? I'm not talking process. That's a whole different. Every product we make today has to meet that criteria of reduced impacts of carbon and other environmental impacts. But this is a more fundamental value proposition, and that is the rationale for the switch from petro to bio. Let me take this a step further with another slide. This is put up by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and I'm going to walk you through this. We have different environmental compartments, right? Atmosphere, oceans, vegetation, and soil. And, for those engineers in the audience, you must have studied thermodynamics. And remember the second law, the laws of thermodynamics tells you matter can neither be created nor destroyed. So you can't take carbon dioxide and just make it go away. You can only put it in some other form. The question is which form is good for you. So think for a minute. 730 gigatons of carbon is in the atmosphere today. 38,000 gigatons in the oceans, 2,000 gigatons in vegetation and soil. And nature cycles carbon between these environmental compartments in a very efficient manner. Look at this. 88 gigatons released into the atmosphere, 90 gigatons fixed by the oceans, 119 gigatons to the atmosphere, 120 fixed by plants. Even farming, land use change, 1.7 gigatons to the atmosphere, 1.9 fixed. Perfectly balanced natural carbon cycles. And then you look at the extreme right, 6.3 gigatons to the environment, no corresponding flux of fixing it. That's the petrofossil feedstock. If you use the petrofossil feedstock at the same rate and cycles as what it is being made, it's perfectly all right. So it is not that it is bad, it is that the rate and timescales of use doesn't match the rates and timescales of sequestration. And that is what I said was the intrinsic value proposition of a plant-based feedstock as opposed to a petrol-based feedstock. Okay? But these two slides hopefully have made the point that this is it. So, that's the material carbon footprint. And now let's get to specific steps. So let's ask this question. If I want to make 100 kilograms of polyethylene, because remember that's our biggest resin being used, or 100 kilograms of biopolyethylene, BioPLA, you have the structures there. And I'm asking the question, what is the impact of the material carbon? If I just switch that carbon from petro to bio, what is happening? And this PET is a very interesting question too. There are, if you count it, if you're in my class I would force you to count it, but I will honor you and say there's 10 carbons there, right? And out of the 10 carbons, if only 2 of those 10 carbons come from bio and 8 come from petro, is there any value? That's the question you're asking, okay? And I want to make 100 kg. So let's do some math around this. Here's the math, okay? And you made the mistake of inviting a professor because he always asks questions and takes you way back into the high schools when you studied these things. So, remember basic stoichiometrics? 100 kilograms of polyethylene resin has got 85.7 kilograms of carbon, right? C2H4, you can calculate it. When carbon is oxidized, it goes to CO2. So 12 kilograms of carbon gives you 44 kilograms of CO2. So, do the math. If I have to manufacture 100 kilograms of polyethylene resin with 85.7 kilograms of carbon in it, that carbon, after being burnt or eventually disposed of, will go to CO2. It's 44 divided by 12 times 85.7, 314 kgs of CO2 released into the environment when it is burnt from the carbon present in the product. You got that? Now let's say that the red carbons is coming from a biological feedstock. You still release 314 kgs of CO2. But you plant another crop, or you plant another tree plantation, and that 314 kgs is fixed by that plant or crop. You are at a zero material carbon footprint. So I'm giving you very simple basic stoichiometries. The carbon cycle tells you that by using a biological feedstock, the rate and timescales of carbon sequestration balances the rate and timescales of use, and putting it back and zero carbon, material carbon footprint, not the process. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the fundamental driver for all these switches we are talking about, okay? And we can determine this experimentally, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute later. In fact, it come up now. If this has to become the rationale, then, and this is one of our biggest contribution to this field, you must be able to have the ability to measure it, right? You're in India, you know that there's always, if I didn't have a method to verify and validate something, you're going to sell me a polyethylene film and claim I made it from bio. How do you know it is from bio? But I tell you so, sir, how can I be wrong? I'm such an honest, truthful person, you have to buy it. So we go into that, and therefore you must have a standard. And the beauty is, nature gives us that standard. And the standard is based like this. In the atmosphere, you have nitrogen-14. Due to cosmic radiation, you get it to 14C, it gets oxidized to radioactive carbon-14. In the atmosphere, radioactive carbon-14 is in equilibrium with stable isotope carbon-12. The half-life of C14 is 5,730 years. By Earth standards, that is very young, okay? Therefore, any product you make from plant mass will have the C14 radioactive carbon signature associated with it, right? Any carbon product made from fossil, because it is over millions of years, has no radioactive carbon signature associated with it. I burn your product, I measure the C14-C12 ratio, I compare it to a standard, and I can tell you accurately, plus or minus 3%, what is the bio-based carbon content of your product. That, ladies and gentlemen, today is the de facto standard adopted worldwide. We started it at ASTM, it's now in the European Union, and ISO also has a standard to measure the bio-based carbon content. And it's because we have that, you can go ahead and manufacture it and make what you want out of it. Okay? So that's the one which put us in place. So, take a step back and ask the question, what about the process, right? We talked about the process footprint, and how many of you have seen LCAs on PLA or polyethylene and say, well, you know, look at this LCA, this is bad, this is good, and they give you all sorts of numbers. And that's why I said that the switch is due to material, and this slide illustrates that. Let me walk you through this. You see this lightly shaded boxes? That is the carbon footprint for, these are actual numbers, converting the feedstock to product. So for PLA, it's around 360, now it is dropped to 300, but it's around 360 kgs of CO2 per 100 kg of resin. Look at polyethylene. It's about 140. It's the most efficient process we have ever done. That's why polyethylene is so very well used. It's less expensive because it's a great process. So if you are a polyethylene manufacturer, then you say, look, I'm only at 150, 160 kgs. You are at 240. You're bad. I'm good. Why do you want to change? But remember this 314 kgs of CO2, which is coming from the carbon? Well, you don't tell about that. No, it's embodied energy, because when you do LCAs around cradle to factory gate, it stays in there. I will burn it next time and I use energy out of it. So you remember I told you about LCA. Nothing right or wrong, but that's the problem. So if you were to report PE, you should have reported 520, not 160. But rather than get into the arguments of semantics, all I'm saying is that the material carbon footprint of bio-based feedstocks will be 0. There is a process carbon and environmental footprint which you need to calculate and must be a part of any product you make, but here's how it is shown. In fact, if you go to Plastics Europe portal and look up that LCA, you'll see this. PP and polyethylene, 1.7 kgs of CO2 per kg. There is no 3.14 kg of carbon coming from the carbon of that material. Why? Because it is cradled to factory gate or cradled to the gate part of it. And that carbon is considered energy and will be used elsewhere, so I don't take it into consideration. And they say that. But you, looking at it, would say, oh, it's only 1.7 kgs. So the message with these slides is that I want to separate material carbon footprint and process carbon footprint, and I submit that the reason to switch is because of the zero material carbon footprint. And if you think anything else, then you're dead wrong. It is this value proposition which is driving it. So let's look at some nice pictures. And this is to the big audience members here, Brazil. This is Braskem, which is the largest polyethylene producer, one of the largest. They also acquired all of Dow's polypropylene business in the US. Their petroleum refinery is right here, next door. Naphtha refining they do. They make polyethylene there. They have ethanol from their farmers. It is trucked to their facility. They have a dehydration reactor, and they have making biopolyethylene today. 200 kilotons capacity, and they're sold out. They also have a 30 kiloton per year polypropylene capacity as well, from ethylene to ethanol. And this is used in a lot of applications. P&G uses it, Johnson & Johnson, Danone, Evian, name it, there's a lot of companies using this. So this is Braskem. So you wonder, here is a company, here's a country, Brazil, which has got resources of natural gas, which has got resources of petroleum, well balanced. But the same can be said of India, and to me, I always wonder in the last evening saying, why are we not doing something like this? Why are we not exploiting the biomass feedstocks to make the chemicals, to make the polymers, in addition to what you do with the petroleum, because that gives you a fundamental value proposition there. Coca-Cola, and if there's a success story, I don't know if anybody from India Glycols is there, I serve on their advisory, but Coca-Cola has introduced plant bottle. This is PET. 2 of those 10 carbons is from bio. It comes from ethylene glycol. That ethylene glycol is made right here in India by India Glycols, right? And as I understand it, India Glycols will build a plant in Brazil to make it for Coca-Cola, because the amount of ethylene glycol needed is going to be huge, okay? Now, if you were again in my class, I would make you work this exercise. 10 carbons, 2 is bio, so the bio-based carbon content is 20. Very simple. On a mass basis, it's 31% by mass glycol, 68% by mass aromatics. And the question is there any value to this from a material carbon footprint? And I will give you the answer. Let's say 37.5 million tons PET is used for just bottles. And if 2 of those 10 carbons came from bio, you do the math, like I did with the stoichiometrics, that translates to 70 million metric tons CO2 savings per year, which translates to 40 million barrels per year of oil savings. It's not going to solve the world's problem, but it is a step in the right direction to prove that you can reduce your carbon footprint by using bio feedstock as opposed to petrol or in combination with it. And now you ask the question, well, why are they not 100%? Well, if anybody in the audience knows how to make terephthalic acid from bio feedstocks and has a process, I have a customer for you. We'll be willing to write you a check tomorrow if you made it for them. I almost want to say, no matter what cost, well, you know that's not true. It's got to be at some cost. But that's where it is headed, and it's going to happen. They are projecting, not predicting, projecting 2015, 2017, they will be 100% bio-based. And there are 4 other big members of this plant collaborative. It's Heinz, who have agreed to make plant bottles. It's Nike, and it's Ford. Ford has come up with the bio-based polyurethanes. All Ford cars now has this in the head seats. The isocyanate is not bio-based, but the diol is. And so you make polyurethanes, and this is the basis for bio-based polyurethanes being used by Ford in the US. So I'm just giving you an example of stories of what is happening today. PLA products, polylactic acid, both bio-based and compostable. They're used in a number of applications. They have beautiful clarity, just like PET is, and each has got its own value. And oh, by the way, PLA priced at $1 a pound, almost equivalent to PET pricing, right? But it's not going to displace PET. It's got its own market, and PET will continue to have its own market. Okay, so that's my bio-based part. Let me quickly talk to you about biodegradability. This is the most misused and abused term, okay? And really, when you talk biodegradability, you have to ask the question, can microorganisms present in that disposal environment consume or eat the plastics? That's what bio means, right? Microbes assimilating your substrate when you dispose it in soil. And you need to ask the question, what extent and in what time frame? And that's that what extent and what time frame never given to you. The so-called biodegradables will say, oh, it is biodegradable. Never mind, it will biodegrade at some time. Don't worry about it. We are all biodegradable. You are, I am, this table is. Given time and the right environment, everything will biodegrade. Okay? And therefore, you must need complete microbial assimilation. We'll talk about that in a minute. The message I have for you is degradable, partially biodegradable, is not acceptable. It has serious health and environmental consequences. So either you ensure that all of your plastic product will be completely removed from the environmental compartment using microorganisms, or don't make it at all. Make it a regular polyethylene, collect it, recycle it, waste to energy, there's a lot of options. But don't make it degradable or partially biodegradable and saying, oh, don't worry about it, you throw it, it will go away. Because that you will be giving the most disservice to the world or to the country, anything you want, because you're going to cause problems, right? Complete or not at all. There's no in-betweens. So some basics. The professor has to tell you the basics, and I'll let you make the call. What is biodegradability? Microorganisms utilize carbon substrate as food for their energy and life processes. It's just like you eat food for your life process. Microorganisms don't eat plastic because they want to clean up the environment for you. However much we would wish that, but that's not what happens. They do it by transporting the carbon into the cells, and inside the cell, what happens? Under aerobic conditions, that carbon is oxidized to CO2. This is a thermodynamically exothermic process which releases 686 kilocalories per mole of energy that is harnessed by the microorganism for its life process. Very simple. Under anaerobic conditions, it is CO2 plus CH4, methane, and that's what is released. So, very simple, right? A measure of the rate and amount of CO2 or CO2 plus CH4 as a function of carbon inputted into the process tells you how much biodegradability you have, right? So why don't you ask for that? Why are we still debating whether something is biodegradable or not biodegradable? I see Dr. Sarup in the audience. For 4 years, 5 years, we debate this in ISO meetings. What is biodegradable? And I'm saying, why are we debating it? The science, this you teach in high school, how biology occurs. And you need to ask for the test how to do it, right? So a measure of this, so it's very simple, right? I'm telling you it's very simple. You take a flask, put soil in it, it has got a lot of microorganisms. Don't give those microorganisms any other carbon food except your test carbon. Give it all the nutrients, vitamins. If the microorganism is utilizing the carbon, CO2 will be evolved. So a plot of carbon conversion to CO2 as a function of time in days will tell you how much of the carbon is being utilized by the microorganisms in what time. And if it meets 90+% in whatever time, 1 year, 2 years, then it will be utilized. If it doesn't, it is not. So why is that so difficult? But this is still happening. It's happening in India. It's happening everywhere. There are people I know in India who have said, oh, I've got this magic dust, you throw it in there, it's going to break down and microorganisms will utilize it. Okay, this is the basis. Now, based on this fundamental biology, there are ASTM, ISO, and European standards. They all say the same thing. So these standards exist. And we need to have 90+%. Remember I said all or nothing is what we're talking about. So, I won't go into the details of this, except to say that you have ASTM, European, ISO standards on conditions of composting or marine, or now we are doing it in soil. All of them require 90+% of the carbon be consumed by the microorganisms as measured by the evolved CO2. And if you don't have that, you should not claim it is biodegradable. You should not sell it as biodegradable because people believe so, and therefore you're causing more harm than good. And I'll show you that in a minute. Recently, ISO packaging, 1806 just passed. It is packaging in the environment. So all standards tell you exactly what I showed you, and that's what you should ask for. These are some of the test methods, and here's what is you as people using standards should know. Test methods teach you how to measure, correct? How to measure the biodegradability or the tensile strength or oxygen permeability. It does not tell you what is pass or fail. Is 10 good? Is 100 good? So people go ahead and say, I passed a ASTM 5511. It's in all plastics news and all. And they come and tell you, I have a biodegradable plastic. It passes ASTM 5511. You have to ask the question, what does pass mean? There is a test method. So it gives you, it can be 0, it could be 50, or it could be 100. What was the value you got? That you need to ask, that you need to validate, and that's really the important part of it. Now, why do we need complete biodegradability and what the problems could be? This is the consequence of degradable plastics. They in China call it white pollution. And they didn't go to just making degradable. In China, if you remember, all those mulch films were made very, very thin. So it would simply break down. When it breaks down, as you all know, polyethylene density is less than 1. It flies all over the place. And so you have these collections of plastic dust in places where there's no even humans there. And these pictures are then used by NGOs to show you how bad the plastics industry is. So you are your own worst enemy, right? I mean, this is not controllable. This is easy to control by selecting the right material, by ensuring that you can, at the end of life, collect it and recycle it. If you make it degradable or partially degradable, you're going to cause worse problems then. This is not even a problem. I'll show you the next problems right here. Here is a microparticle of polystyrene, degradable polystyrene. It's colonized by food. You know, it's all these things. Fishes eat it, birds eat it, and then you're transporting not The polyethylene is not toxic, but it's all the toxins which it absorbs as it transposes through the system. For example, PCBs, DDE, nonyl phenols were detected in high concentration in degradable polypropylene resin pellets collected from 4 Japanese courts. This is published in the literature. They concluded, and you can look at all these references, plastics residues function as transport medium for toxic chemicals in the marine environment. What I am submitting to this group is, again, if we are going to use plastics and it's got all these wonderful value functions and attributes, make sure the end of life is good. Make sure you collect it and recycle it. Make sure you don't make it degradable or partially biodegradable so that you don't see it and it causes problems like this. That's the message I have for you on that. And if I may end with this message on greenwashing. You heard the word greenwashing, hopefully, right? And it directly related to additives. Additives added to polyethylene, polypropylene will degrade the polymer to small fragments which will eventually biodegrade in 9 months to 5 years. This is a statement you'll see in every one of these things. And I trust, verify. I need to see the data which shows that the microorganisms are actually using it and you see it. If not, you're going to cause more problems and you're responsible for the problem being created. So beware. Here's how you do it. Here's data from an organic additive supplied by them. This graph up here shows you 90% of carbon utilized by the microorganism as measured by the evolved CO2, 90%. The master batch, the additive-based material, does have some biodegradation, but then it levels off, plateaus at 20%. Now, using this data, how can you go ahead and buy a product with the statement that don't worry, at 1% this will biodegrade in 9 months to 5 years? What is the relationship between the graph which you see and how you can extrapolate it to 9 months to 5 years complete biodegradation? That's the question I pose to you. One more. How do you do it? Very simple. You won't allow even your high school kids to do this. This is the green line, it plateaus out, so you stop the test right here. Okay? And then you draw a dotted line and say, well, it's linear. It'll go away in 9 months to 5 years. You don't bother. You want to so badly believe in it, you don't even want to see the data. And that's what is happening. Finally, I'll end with this slide because this happens not just in the industrial world. This is a publication. This is a publication in Chem Communications, which is a well-respected journal. It takes polyethylene, it grafts sugar on the backbone, and the claim is made that this greatly increases the rates of biodegradation. So what is greatly increased? They show a weight loss of 2 to 12%. Not biodegradable, just weight loss. And what does the press say? Sugar turns plastics biodegradable. Bacteria make a meal of sweetened polyethylene and polystyrene. So all you have to do is throw some sugar into your next polyethylene resin, make film or molded articles, and you can claim it's biodegradable because that's what is being done. So hopefully I've alerted you, warned you of biodegradability is a value proposition in conjunction with disposal systems like composting, but you have to ensure that 90 plus or all of that carbon will be utilized and removed, otherwise you have serious environmental and health consequences. And so verify it, and that would be the most important thing. And the last one, of course, is the USDA does, the United States Department of Agriculture has been mandated by a federal law which requires the US government to buy bio-based products. Now they do it not because you are familiar with US politics. So the Republicans like it not because they are concerned about the environment. it helps small business, it helps the farmer, it creates value. The Democrats like it because it is for the environment. So the message to you is simple. As business people, it does not matter whether you think bio-based is useful for the environment. It is good for business. It is good for the farmer. It diversifies your base and it allows you to innovate in a whole new area, right? And thank you very much.